When billionaire CEO Vivian Croft slid a $2 million fake marriage contract across the mahogany desk, she expected the desperate single dad to sign it without blinking. She was wrong. He pushed the pen away, looked her dead in the eye, and made a counteroffer that brought the world's most ruthless woman to her knees. Vivian Croft did not do feelings. She did acquisitions, hostile takeovers, and liquidations. At 32, she was the undisputed sovereign of Croft International, a multi-billion-dollar commercial real estate empire that dominated the Manhattan skyline. But as she sat at the head of the glass-walled boardroom on the 55th floor, looking at the 12 men and women who held the power to strip her of her legacy, Vivian realized that logic and spreadsheets were no longer enough. The stock is bleeding, Vivian, Richard Croft, her uncle, and the chief instigator of the board, said smoothly. He adjusted his silk tie, his eyes gleaming with barely concealed malice. Your image is a liability. The press calls you the Ice Queen. The public thinks you're a machine. And with the pending acquisition of the Harrison Ford hotel chain, a brand built entirely on family values and warmth, the shareholders are spooked. They don't want a cold, isolated corporate raider at the helm. They want stability. They want humanity. I increased our quarterly profits by 14%, Richard. Vivian fired back, her voice like cracking ice. My humanity is irrelevant. Not anymore, Richard countered. The board is calling for a vote of no confidence next month. Unless you can prove you aren't the ruthless, isolated automaton, the media paints you as you are out. Show us a personal life, Vivian. Show us you can nurture something other than a bank account. Until then, the Harrison Ford deal is on ice. Vivian left the boardroom with her jaw locked so tight her teeth ached. She needed a miracle. She needed a shield. 40 miles away on the sprawling grounds of Vivian's Connecticut estate, Arthur Pendleton was wiping sweat from his brow, his calloused hands gripping a heavy steel spade. Arthur was a master landscape architect, but lately he was just a man drowning. At 34, Arthur was a single father to 6-year-old Lily. He was ruggedly handsome, with dirt beneath his fingernails and a permanent crease of worry between his eyes. He had spent the last 3 years building a safe, quiet life for his daughter after his ex-wife, Chloe, abandoned them to find herself in Europe. But Chloe had returned, and she hadn't come back alone. Chloe had married Preston Hastings, a venture capitalist with a net worth of $50 million and a team of vicious lawyers. 2 weeks ago, Chloe had filed for full custody of Lily, claiming Arthur's modest income and long working hours made him an unfit parent. Arthur's phone buzzed in his pocket. He dropped the spade and pulled it out. It was his lawyer, Mr. Henderson. Tell me you have good news, Henderson, Arthur said, his voice raspy. I'm sorry, Arthur, the lawyer replied, sounding genuinely defeated. Hastings just filed an emergency motion to relocate Lily to Paris. They have the money to tie this up in litigation for years. If you want to fight this, I need a $50,000 retainer by Friday, just to get us through the initial hearings. And Arthur, you need to show the judge you have a stable, ideal environment. A 2-parent household with significant resources always looks better to a family court judge. Right now, you're a single contractor living in a 2-bedroom apartment. They are going to eat you alive. Arthur hung up the phone, a cold wave of despair washing over him. $50,000. He barely had $5,000 in his savings account. He looked over to the shade of a massive oak tree where Lily was sitting on a checkered blanket, coloring in her sketchbook. She wore a faded yellow sundress, her little legs swinging as she hummed a tune. She was his entire world. The thought of Chloe, who hadn't called on a single birthday, taking Lily across the ocean, made Arthur's chest tighten to the point of agony. That afternoon, Vivian Croft arrived at her estate, early, desperate to escape the swarming paparazzi in the city. As her black SUV rolled up the gravel driveway, she spotted Arthur. He was lifting a massive stone planter, the muscles in his back and arms straining against his sweat-dampened shirt. But what caught Vivian's eye wasn't the man's undeniable physique. It was the little girl running up to him. Vivian watched through the tinted glass as Arthur dropped to one knee, wiping the dirt from his hands on his jeans, before gently fixing a crooked flower in his daughter's hair. He smiled a real devastatingly warm smile that completely transformed his tired face. Suddenly, a camera shutter clicked from the tree line. A paparazzo had breached the perimeter. Vivian's security team chased the photographer away, but the damage was done. Or so she thought. The next morning, Vivian walked into her office to find her PR director, Beatrice, beaming. Beatrice tossed a tabloid onto Vivian's desk. The headline roared, "The Ice Queen's Secret Heart." Below the headline was a blurry, zoomed-in photo of Vivian standing on her estate balcony, looking down at Arthur and Lily in the gardens. The angle made it look as though she was gazing at them with profound maternal longing. "The internet is losing its mind," Beatrice said excitedly. "They think he's your secret lover. They think you've been hiding a family. The Harrison Ford executives called this morning. They loved the photo. They said it shows a nurturing side they didn't know you had." Vivian stared at the photo. "He's my landscaper, Beatrice." "I don't care if he's the milkman, Vivian. The board is eating this up. Richard is furious because it completely ruins his narrative that you're a robot. But here's the catch: you have to lean into it. If you deny it, you're back to being the corporate villain. You need a husband. And this guy, the rugged, hard-working single dad, it's PR gold. The public will worship you for falling for a blue-collar family man." Vivian's mind raced. It was insane. It was completely absurd. But as she looked at the numbers, the plummeting stock, the impending vote, her cold, calculating logic took over. "Find out everything you can about him," Vivian ordered. "Financials, debts, criminal records, everything." An hour later, Beatrice returned with a thick folder. "Arthur Pendleton, clean record, excellent credit until recently. He's drowning in legal fees. His ex-wife married a tech millionaire and is trying to take full custody of the daughter. He needs 50 grand by Friday, or he loses the kid." Vivian's eyes narrowed as she read the file. A man drowning in debt. A man desperate to save his child. He had a price. Everyone had a price. "Draft a non-disclosure agreement," Vivian commanded, her voice devoid of emotion. "And draft a marriage contract, 18 months, $2 million. I'll buy him the best custody lawyers in the country. Bring him to me." Arthur felt entirely out of place standing in Vivian Croft's penthouse office. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a dizzying view of the Manhattan skyline, and the air conditioning was so crisp it felt sterile. He stood in his steel-toed work boots and a worn denim jacket, clutching his battered cap while Vivian sat behind a desk that likely cost more than his life insurance policy. She wore a tailored white suit that looked like armor. Her blonde hair was pinned back flawlessly, and her piercing blue eyes assessed him like a piece of real estate she was considering bulldozing. "Mr. Pendleton, please sit," she said, gesturing to a leather chair. Arthur sat cautious and tense. "Your assistant said there was an emergency regarding the estate gardens, but we're in the city." "There is no emergency with the gardens," Vivian said smoothly. She slid a thick, leather-bound folder across the desk. "I will get straight to the point, Mr. Pendleton. I have a severe public relations problem that is threatening my position at my company. You have a severe financial problem that is threatening your custody of your daughter. I propose a mutually beneficial transaction." Arthur frowned, looking at the folder. "A transaction." "Open it." Arthur opened the folder. The legal jargon was dense, but the bold numbers leaped off the page. $2 million, $2 million. I am offering you $2 million tax-free deposited into an offshore account, along with the unlimited services of my personal legal team, to crush your ex-wife in family court. Vivienne explained, her tone as casual as if she were ordering a coffee. In exchange, you and I will enter into a legally binding marriage for exactly 18 months. You will move into my Manhattan penthouse and my Connecticut estate. You will attend public galas by my side, smile for the cameras, and play the role of the devoted husband. Your daughter will be provided with the best tutors and private security. Arthur stared at her, utterly bewildered. You want to buy a fake family. I am securing a business asset, Vivienne corrected coldly. My board of directors requires me to project a stable, family-oriented image to close a crucial merger. The paparazzi have already linked us. We simply formalize the narrative. We will have separate bedrooms. No physical intimacy beyond what is required for public appearances. When the 18 months are up, we divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. You walk away a millionaire, keeping your daughter. I keep my company. Do we have a deal? Arthur looked down at the contract. $2 million. It was more money than he could comprehend. It would pay Henderson. It would secure Lily's future forever. He could buy a house, set up a college fund, and never lose a night of sleep over bills again. He looked at Vivienne. She was watching him with supreme confidence, already holding out a Mont Blanc pen. She expected him to grovel. She expected him to sign his life away because she held all the chips. But as Arthur looked closer at the clauses, a sudden realization hit him. She needs me. Vivienne Croft, with her billions of dollars and her untouchable empire, was vulnerable. If she didn't get this, she lost everything she had built. And more importantly, Arthur realized the flaw in her plan regarding his daughter. $2 million, Arthur said, slowly leaning back in his chair and ignoring the pen. And your lawyers. It's an exceedingly generous offer, Arthur. I suggest you take it. It's a band-aid, Arthur replied, his voice hardening. Chloe's new husband, Preston Hastings, is worth $50 million. Do you know how men like that operate, Vivienne? If I walk into court, suddenly flush with $2 million from a quickie marriage, their lawyers will tear me apart. They'll claim the marriage is a sham. They'll subpoena our lives. And when we divorce in 18 months, Preston will just sue me for custody again. He will drag me through the courts until my $2 million is drained in legal fees, and then he will take Lily anyway. Vivienne frowned, her perfect facade cracking slightly. My lawyers will ensure ironclad custody. Nothing is ironclad against $50 million and a mother's legal rights, Arthur said sharply, unless I have a permanent nuclear deterrent. I don't want your cash, Vivienne. I don't want a $2 million payout. Vivienne scoffed, crossing her arms. Let me guess. You want 510. Don't push your luck, Mr. Pendleton. I can find another actor. Not one the media has already attached to you. Arthur shot back, his eyes locking onto hers. The subservient landscaper was gone. In his place was a fiercely protective father. I will sign your contract. I will play the doting husband. I will save your reputation and your company. But my terms are non-negotiable. Name them, she challenged. First, Arthur said, holding up a finger, I want 5% equity in Croft International, fully vested. Vivienne literally choked on her breath, slamming her hands on the desk. Are you out of your mind? 5% is worth nearly $400 million. You are a gardener. I am your only lifeline, Arthur corrected without flinching. I want 5%, because cash can be spent. But equity means I am permanently shielded. Preston Hastings won't dare drag a major shareholder of Croft International into a muddy public court battle. The equity guarantees Lily's safety forever. Vivienne glared at him, her chest heaving. Fine, You want to extort me? I'll give you restricted stock. What else? The second term, Arthur said, his voice dropping to a low, dead serious register. We aren't just faking a marriage. If I am moving Lily into your home, uprooting her life, and exposing her to the media circus of being your stepdaughter, you have to commit. Fully. I told you I will pay for her security and schooling. No, Arthur said. You are going to legally adopt her. Silence fell over the office. It was so quiet Arthur could hear the faint hum of the city traffic 50 stories below. Vivian stared at him, the colour draining from her face. Adopt. You will sign legal documents becoming Lily's adoptive co-parent, Arthur stated firmly. You want the board to believe you're a family woman. Nothing proves it more than legally adopting your new husband's child. But more importantly, it solves my problem permanently. If Vivian Croft is legally Lily's mother, Chloe and Preston lose all leverage. No judge in the world will take a child away from the Croft empire. And when we divorce in 18 months, you remain her legal guardian on paper. You never have to see her again if you don't want to, but your name stays on her birth certificate as a shield. You are asking me to bind myself to a child. Forever, Vivian whispered, genuinely stunned. For the first time in her life, the Ice Queen looked terrified. Arthur, that is madness. I don't know how to be a mother. I despise children. I don't have a maternal bone in my body. I'm not asking you to be her mother, Arthur said softly but firmly. I'm asking you to be her bodyguard. On paper. You provide the legal shield, I provide the love. You get to keep your $10 billion company. I get to keep my little girl. Arthur stood up, buttoning his worn denim jacket. He looked down at the billionaire who suddenly looked very small behind her massive desk. Rewrite the contract, Vivian. 5% equity and adoption papers. You have until tomorrow morning to decide if your company is worth it. Arthur turned and walked out of the office, leaving the most powerful woman in New York sitting in absolute stunned silence. For 24 hours, the executive floor of Croft International felt like a powder keg. Vivian paced the length of her office, her mind a whirlwind of risk assessments and liability projections. Adopting a child, surrendering 5% of her empire. It was unprecedented. It was corporate suicide. Yet when her Uncle Richard casually mentioned that the Harrison Ford executives were reconsidering the merger due to her lack of familial stability, Vivian's pride ignited. She would not let Richard steal her life's work. The next morning, Arthur was summoned back to the penthouse. He walked in to find Vivian, flanked by 3 terrified-looking corporate lawyers. On the desk lay the revised documents. You win, Mr. Pendleton, Vivian said, her voice tight but resolute. But if we do this, we do it my way. No leaks, no mistakes. To ensure absolute clarity, Vivian's lead counsel handed Arthur a summarized document of their new reality. Contract clause, original offer, Vivian's terms, counteroffer, Arthur's terms duration, 18 months, 18 months, minimum compensation, $2 million, cash, 5%, equity in Croft, international living arrangement, separate quarters, public appearances, only cohabitation, full family integration, child custody. Vivian provides legal funding. Vivian legally adopts Lily Arthur, signed the papers without a tremor in his hand. 2 days later, a private judge expedited the marriage license, and a heavily guarded courthouse in Manhattan witnessed the quiet, bizarre union of a billionaire and a landscaper. The transition was jarring. Arthur and 6-year-old Lily moved into Vivian's sprawling, minimalist penthouse on Fifth Avenue. The residence was a masterpiece of cold, monochromatic wealth, white marble, sharp glass angles, and priceless, untouchable art. Within a week, Lily's crayons were scattered across the imported Italian glass coffee table, and Arthur's muddy work boots sat unapologetically next to Vivian's row of red-soled Louboutins. Vivian tried to maintain her distance. She worked late at dinner in her study and treated Arthur like a colleague on a high-stakes project. But Lily was a force of nature. One evening, Vivian returned home, exhausted, after a grueling 9-hour deposition. She found Lily sitting on the living room rug, attempting to build a precarious tower out of crystal coasters. "Those are baccarat. Crystal Lily," Vivian said stiffly, rubbing her temples. "They break." Lily looked up, her big brown eyes entirely unafraid of the Ice Queen. "My dad says strong things only break if you drop them. Do you want to help? I need a roof." Vivian hesitated. She looked at the little girl, then at the empty, silent penthouse that had been her solitary prison for years. Slowly, Vivian lowered herself to the rug. She carefully placed a coaster on top of the tower. When it didn't fall, Lily beamed, throwing her little arms around Vivian's stiff neck. For the first time in her adult life, Vivian Croft felt a crack in the armor she had spent decades building. The child wasn't a liability. She was a heartbeat in a dead room. The media rollout was a masterpiece. Vivian and Arthur attended the Metropolitan Museum of Art Gala arm in arm. Arthur fitted in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo, looked less like a landscaper and more like a rugged movie star. When a reporter aggressively shoved a microphone in Vivian's face to ask about the sudden marriage, Arthur seamlessly stepped in front of her, gently shielding her with a protective hand on her waist, and offered a charismatic, self-deprecating joke that had the press laughing. The photos went viral. The Harrison Ford executives were ecstatic. Croft International's stock surged by 8% in a single morning. But the victory was short-lived. The morning of the official adoption hearing, Arthur's phone rang. It was Chloe. "You think you're clever, Arthur," his ex-wife sneered through the receiver. "Preston and I saw the news. A fake marriage to a billionaire to save your custody rights. Preston's lawyers have filed an injunction against the adoption. We are taking you to court, and we are going to expose this sham to the world." Arthur's blood ran cold. He looked across the breakfast island at Vivian, who was sipping her espresso. "It's Chloe," Arthur said, quietly hanging up. "Preston filed an injunction. They're claiming fraud." Vivian set her cup down, her eyes darkening into a familiar, terrifying shade of boardroom blue. "They want a war over my daughter?" she asked softly. The use of the word "my" made Arthur's breath hitch. "Let them come." The mediation room at the New York Supreme Court was suffocatingly tense. Arthur sat rigidly beside Vivian, who looked immaculate in a sharp charcoal grey suit. Across the heavy oak table sat Chloe, looking smug in designer clothes she hadn't paid for, and her new husband, Preston Hastings. Preston wore a smirk that screamed old money and unchecked arrogance. "Let's stop wasting time," Preston said, leaning back and resting his expensive loafers on the edge of the table's leg. "We all know this marriage is a PR stunt. Vivian Croft doesn't marry gardeners. I have a team of private investigators digging through your trash as we speak. Hand over full custody of the kid Arthur, and we won't leak the fraud to the SEC and ruin Miss Croft's company." Arthur gripped the edge of the table, ready to lunge across it, but Vivian placed a cool, restraining hand on his arm. She didn't look at Chloe. She locked her predatory gaze entirely on Preston. "Mr. Hastings," Vivian began, her voice practically dripping with icicles. "You are worth what, $50 million, a respectable sum for a venture capitalist." She opened a sleek leather folder and slid 3 documents across the table. "I run a $10 billion empire," Vivian continued smoothly. "And I did not build it by letting mediocre men threaten my family. I spent the last 48 hours doing a deep dive into your portfolio, Preston. Here is what I found. Document 1. You are heavily leveraged in a commercial real estate development in Soho. Croft International just purchased the 3 surrounding lots. If I decide to build a high-rise waste management facility there, which I have the permits for, your property value drops to 0. Document 2. Your largest tech startup is banking on a server contract with a firm in Silicon Valley. I am the majority shareholder of that firm. I can kill your contract with a single phone call. Document 3. Your line of credit with Manhattan Central Bank. The CEO is my godfather. He's already agreed to call in your loans if I ask him nicely. Preston's smirk vanished. The color drained from his face as he stared at the documents, realizing he had brought a knife to a nuclear standoff. "You're bluffing?" Preston stammered. "Try me," Vivian whispered, leaning in. "Withdraw the injunction. Relinquish all claims to Lily permanently. If you ever say the name Arthur Pendleton again, I will financially dismantle you so thoroughly that you will be begging for a job pulling weeds in my garden. Do you understand me?" Preston swallowed hard, his hands shaking, as he grabbed a pen and signed the withdrawal forms. Chloe looked horrified, screaming at her husband, but Preston just dragged her out of the room. Arthur sat in stunned silence. He looked at Vivian, awestruck. "You didn't have to do that. You risked antitrust lawsuits. For us." Vivian looked away, a faint blush breaking her icy demeanor. "You are my husband, Arthur. Lily is my daughter. I protect what is mine." The adoption went through smoothly that afternoon, but the drama was not over. 3 days later, the Croft International Board of Directors convened for the final vote on the Harrison-Ford merger. Richard Croft stood at the head of the table looking triumphant. "Before we vote," Richard announced loudly to the shareholders, "I have compelling evidence that Vivian Croft has committed corporate fraud. Her marriage is a sham designed to manipulate our stock. I have an anonymous, sworn affidavit from an insider stating there is a secret contract paying this man $2 million to fake a marriage." Gasps erupted around the boardroom. Vivian sat perfectly still. "Is this true, Vivian?" the board chairman demanded. "Did you sign a contract paying him to marry you?" "Yes," Vivian said, clearly standing up. The room exploded in murmurs. Richard grinned like a predator who had finally cornered his prey. "However," Vivian continued, her voice cutting through the noise like a scythe. She pulled a piece of paper from her blazer pocket. "That contract was nullified yesterday." She held up the original fake marriage agreement, then deliberately, slowly tore it into pieces, letting the shreds fall onto the mahogany table. "I did not pay Arthur Pendleton," Vivian announced to the stunned room. "Instead, yesterday afternoon, I voluntarily transferred 15% of my personal voting shares into an irrevocable blind trust for my daughter Lily Croft Pendleton. I also rewrote my will. Arthur is my sole beneficiary." Richard's jaw dropped. You gave away $1 billion of voting power to a child." "I secured my family's future," Vivian corrected. She looked around the room, her eyes blazing with a fierce, undeniable passion. "I married Arthur to save this company. I will not deny that. But in the process, I found the one thing I was missing: a reason to build it. My husband and my daughter are not PR props. They are my life. If you want my resignation, take it. I have enough money to retire today. But if you want the most ruthless, driven and motivated CEO in this city leading the Harrison-Ford merger to unprecedented profits, you vote for me." The room was dead silent. Then the CEO of Harrison-Ford, who was sitting in the corner, started a slow clap. Within seconds, the entire board joined in. The vote was unanimous. Richard Croft was quietly stripped of his committee chairmanships by the end of the day. That evening, the penthouse was quiet. Lily was asleep in her newly decorated pink bedroom. Arthur found Vivian standing out on the terrace, overlooking the glittering lights of the city. He stepped out into the cool night air and wrapped his arms around her from behind. It was the first time he had initiated physical contact without a camera present. Vivian leaned back into his chest, letting out a long, exhausted sigh. "You tore up the contract," Arthur murmured into her hair. "You gave Lily 15%. She deserves the world," Vivian replied softly. "The 18 months are up in a year and a half," Arthur teased gently, turning her around to face him. "Are we going to need a new contract?" Vivian looked up at the rugged, brilliant man who had walked into her pristine, empty life and completely upended it. She reached up, tracing the permanent crease of worry between his eyes, realizing it had finally smoothed out. "No contracts," Vivian whispered, pulling him in. "Just us." And as the Ice Queen kissed the landscaper under the Manhattan stars, she knew she had just made the best acquisition of her life. What did you think of Arthur's brilliant counteroffer and Vivian's ruthless takedown in the courtroom? Sometimes the greatest risks we take aren't in business, but in opening our hearts. If you loved this story of power, family, and unexpected love, smash that like button, share this video with someone who loves a good plot twist, and don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling, drama-filled stories every week. Let us know your favorite moment in the comments below.